Given that actually some of the people on the call today might actually be the ones who attended the last one also, I will not go through the repetition of what I did. But in case there are some people who did not attend the last one, I will perhaps take literally a few minutes to summarize. And at least my message from the last discussion was that I passed through this. I guess I shouldn't say this because everything is different. But in 2001, 2008, also there were severe downturns. In one case, I was actually with a consulting firm. In the second one, I was at SAP running their large deal accounts in India, or large accounts in India, sorry. And in both cases, I would say the going was pretty tough, but I think that we navigated it better in 2008 than we did in 2001. And I think if literally we have to summarize in one line, it is just all about, I think, planning for the worst and then readjusting as you get more data. You are actually much better off, really sort of being super pessimistic about the situation, adjusting your costs to that scenario, ensuring that the cash you have, with that cash you can get a reasonable runway. And at least in my books, the definition of reasonable is 18 to 24 months at least, assuming that there is no money that's going to flow into your company. How do you make sure that you survive? Because that's priority number one. It is possible that you may overreact, but then that is better than being in a situation where you underreact. Um, and those will be hard calls. I do think that despite all the difficulties, it was still easier for me to do it as a corporate manager in the past. I think when you're a founder, there is a lot of blood, sweat, emotion that sort of goes into building what you build. And sometimes these realignment of cost structures is actually a pretty hard thing to do. It is also hard because I think all of you, by nature, by DNA, by definition, are optimists. If you are not optimist, you won't be an entrepreneur to begin with. And therefore, sometimes when you wear those optimistic hats, it's not that easy to say sort of what is the worst case scenario. I would still urge that be as conservative as you can be in thinking through what the worst case scenario can be, and make sure that the current dollars that you have in the bank are truly able to stretch themselves for the next 18 to 24 months. And the last point I'll make is that whatever you have to do is do it now. Do whatever you need to do to renegotiate many different kinds of costs. Ultimately, I still do believe that a lot of your fixed costs are going to come from people cost, and you may find yourself in a situation where there is no choice but to touch those costs as well. Clearly, it's not the day that we plan for, not what we wish for, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do just to be able to survive. So that's essentially what we discussed the last time. What I was thinking this time was that number one, I would actually prefer to have a slightly longer time towards the end for Q&A. We actually had very little time for Q&A last time, but I was still going to go through three, four different things. Number one is, while it may sound like a gloom and doom, that being said, I think there are sometimes many of these situations lead to some opportunities also. So I'll spend some time actually on discussing some of these opportunities, at least that we are seeing. Number two is that would love to go into a little bit more detail on what the investor mindset is in this situation. Remember that investors are in some ways going through this in proxy because they have large portfolios. They're seeing these situations emerging across their portfolio. How are they reacting? What their outlook is? And again, I'll try to give some insights from their perspective. And third, I was actually going to walk through some of the things that we have seen our portfolio companies do. And again, we are a startup ourselves as Stellaris. We currently have 15 companies in our portfolio, but to whatever extent, without taking the names I can share, I'll actually give you some views on what the portfolio companies have done, and maybe that'll give you some ideas on what kind of things you could do within your companies as well. That's essentially what I was thinking of covering. But thereafter, happy to cover anything and make it a Q&A. And to the extent I can answer, I will be happy to answer questions that people have. So first up is that what kind of opportunities are we seeing because of this situation? And again, I think as bad as a crisis is, I mean, like they say, never let a crisis go waste. But certainly what we are seeing is that there are certain sectors which are benefiting from this, and I'll take multiple examples. I clearly am not an expert on all sectors, but I'll give you different examples that I have witnessed. We have a company in the online healthcare space, which is essentially they use artificial intelligence to do remote consultations. And today, their technologies are advanced enough that they can do the full consultation just on the app. So, um, in their case, they're actually seeing a massive surge in demand, not just because of coronavirus or suspected coronavirus patients. In their case, what is happening is that, let's say you had a child who was sick, there was a runny nose, and in business as usual, you might have gone to a nearby hospital to meet a doctor. Today, you are afraid of going and seeing anyone because you would imagine that even if my child was fine, there are chances that my child will actually contract something else. And therefore, there is this fear of physically going to hospitals. And in their case, uh, we are we are seeing a massive upsurge of demand. Example two, I actually just spoke to someone who is part of the India management team for one of the largest e-com players in the country. I will not give you too many points to guess. There aren't that many guesses actually to be made. And I was asking them as to what their outlook is, and they actually feel that this crisis will, um, in the worst case scenario. And again, remember that they, even if they're a large company, they're also doing all kinds of scenario planning. But if they really wear a very negative hat, even then they think that it'll end up being a flat year for them. Most of the e-commerce players are still largely urban, and they find that for the segment which is transacting online, they'll actually be even more amenable to transact online today than what they were. And even when the lockdown opens up, there will still be a fear, or at least people will think that things that we can do online, why should we actually go and do that physically? And therefore they expect that that sentiment change is actually likely to stay for some time, and therefore they think of themselves as net beneficiaries. I would argue that if I'm a telecom company, and again, that's not a startup example again, but if you were to be Airtel, Jio, etc., I'm sure that you're struggling to meet the demand that this situation is throwing up at the moment. I was reading a chart from Moody's. They expect communication, internet services, online retail. Actually, I would imagine a lot of the essentials, even in the FMCG. I think a lot of the sectors are certainly going to see an upsurge. There will be certain sectors, I think, clearly, which are, again, no points for guessing there. But if you look at things like hospitality, travel, some of the non-essential retail, consumer durables, I think many of those sectors are clearly going to go through a slightly more prolonged impact of the COVID situation. But in the end, I think there will be opportunities. One example I can again give you from our portfolio is a logistics company. They do both the mid mile and the last mile logistics, both in the urban as well as the rural areas in the country. And right now, they're actually not able to cope up with the demand. And maybe that is short term, who knows? But we again do expect that they'll be net beneficiaries of this situation as opposed to it being the other way around. So there are clearly pockets of opportunities, though I think it is fair to say that for most part, we are likely to see reduction in demand for most sectors. The one area where I spend most of my time is SaaS, and I do think that enterprise software industry will get actually quite hit in this process, because software is actually one of those things which you can always buy tomorrow, you can always buy 3 months later. Even if you were working on spreadsheet, it was inefficient. But you know what? It's okay. It's not a burning issue. You can always buy it tomorrow. So I think some of those sectors are likely to be impacted quite severely. Um, One other example that I think I talked about, which is sometimes there are opportunities at a sectoral level, but there are also certain kinds of operating efficiencies that I think you might end up figuring out in this process. And while I don't have a great startup example, I will give you an example from my SAP days, which is that SAP used to have a net 30 or net 60 days payment terms for all the business it used to do in India. And we found that payments in India never came on time. I'm sure that's not a surprise to you. And we found it to be the same. Our days sales outstanding was actually more than a year at one point in time in 2008, which effectively meant we were writing contracts, we were selling software licenses, but we were not collecting cash. And if, as we disaggregated that, we find that in the large enterprise, we were actually still able to collect cash for most part. But in the SMB business in India, collections is actually a major talent, and there were lots of default. So we were writing revenue in our books, and we were actually taking charges against these revenues in the future, which was turning out to be a chaos. So as the 2008 crisis hit us, we made a fairly draconian call, or at least it seemed draconian at that point in time. We said that in the entire SMB space in the country, and by the way, for SAP, SMB meant anything less than 1,500 crores revenue. So less than $200 million revenue company. In that space, we said, we are not going to sell without advance payment. We told the sales guys that if you can't collect the payment upfront, we are actually not going to book revenue. So all the sales guys reacted very sharply. They said that, look, we are going to be wiped out of the SMB segment in this country. Makes no sense. Competition is going to eat our lunch. All that was told to us. We still said that, look, doesn't matter. If you can't collect cash, there's no point doing business. Fast forward, we actually realized that not only did it not impact SMB business, we actually thrived. And even though I would argue that the crisis got over by the end of 2009 for most part, but that policy stayed. And I mean, even though I have left SAP now 7 years back, but I believe that that policy has stayed so far, which is that SAP doesn't do business without collecting upfront cash for SMB. And the intent of highlighting this example is that, sometimes these, as I say, necessity is the mother of invention. You might find that you will actually do certain things or develop certain things in these times that is actually going to stay good for you, actually for the much longer term, and not just about this crisis. The second part, as I said, I wanted to cover is the investor sentiment at this point in time. Lots of entrepreneurs have called me, written to me, and I'm sure, they're writing to other people as well, saying that, are we still investing or are we not investing? Also, our portfolio founders are coming to us, asking us that will we back them up in case they run out of cash or not? Everybody's insecure. They all want to get some assurances. But I wanted to give at least some view on how investors are thinking about it. So 2-3 different parts of it. Number one is that actually on the positive side, if you go back to most of the downturns, you will find that some great companies got created during those downturns. I may be mistaken. I was not a VC at that point, but I think as far as I know, the first round for Flipkart was done during one such period as well. And there will be plenty of other examples of companies where their initial rounds actually happened during the middle of these crises, which were fairly deep. And the reason is that, in general, I would argue that entrepreneurship is not looking for an opportunistic time always. People start companies without sort of trying to plan for up cycles and down cycles. Until a month back, most of you didn't know whether there is going to be an up cycle or a down cycle. Neither did we in this situation. I think there is one more difference in these times, which is that you will find that in very bull markets, there are actually a lot more companies who start companies. And I would also say that many of those are probably not the serious founders, in the sense that if you go back to the late 90s, or if you go back to 2007, 2008, and actually as recently as 2014-15, there was a massive surge in founders. And many of those you will find are ex-consultants, ex-bankers, etc. And they are trying to be a bit opportunistic. And while cases will differ between individuals, um, at least I do feel that there is a category of founders in these bull markets where they are trying to catch a wave. They're not necessarily that passionate about solving a problem. And thank you for the comment. I'm seeing the comment on the chat here, which is saying that companies like Uber, Airbnb, Slack, Pinterest, WhatsApp, my God, that's and Square. Oh my God, that's actually a pretty. I mean, as strong a list as it gets. Which just proves the point that I think great companies do get created. And as I said that I think you get the real serious, passionate founders who want to solve problems, who start during such times. So as an investor, we also see this as actually a um, um, very good time to be putting our dollars to work. We also feel that we don't think that there is a gun on our head. Entrepreneurs don't come to us and tell us that, look, we have 2 term sheets in the bank already. Tell us if you want to give a term sheet in 2 days. So there is time to get to know the founders, time to understand the markets, and time to build conviction uh, on their businesses. Um, and to be fair, there is also less sort of pricing competition um, uh, in these situations, and therefore we actually we you will find that most investors are always open for business during such times. In fact, I will say that they almost see this as an opportunity. That being said, I think in the early stages of the crisis, and that is true for 2008, and I think that is true now, is that as investors, we don't know how long and how deep this crisis is going to be. Neither do you, nor do we. So what does that do to us? That does two things to us. Number one is that, let's assume that, and I'm just going to take these as uh, random examples. Let's assume that 50% of a fund's money is either already invested or reserved against the companies that they have invested in, and 50% is dry powder. Now, as the crisis hits, they might find that some of their companies are in distress, or they may enter a stage of distress if the crisis were to continue for 6 months. So, as an investor, you are saying that maybe I thought I have 50% dry powder, but maybe I should reserve an additional 10% and leave only 40% as dry powder, because I don't know if I may need to put more dollars to support my existing companies. And therefore, the total amount of dry powder actually shrinks in these situations. Number one. Number two is that whichever stage that you invest in, you typically want that in the next round, there are other investors who lead the next round. And until there is some clarity that people have started opening up their purses, you don't want to sometimes write a check. The company needs the next round in 18 months, and you find that even 18 months later, the market has not really opened up. So there is always that fear that people are looking for some proof that markets have actually begun to open up. And I know that it's a bit of a catch-22 argument, but essentially, certain level of uncertainty people want to see behind them before they begin to write checks. So I think the net of that is that yes, investors will continue to be open for business. They'll continue to evaluate companies, and they will continue to invest. But I think they will become more selective. The bar will go higher, and I think they will use some of their existing cash to support their current companies. The unfortunate part of what's happening, however, is that in many cases, people had given a term sheet. They were going through a financial legal due diligence, and the coronavirus has hit. And I think depending on the investor, you will find that the reactions are going to be different. There are some investors who will say that, look, if I once gave a that commitment stands. Even though term sheet is not a binding document, but I made that commitment in all good faith, and I'm going to hold true to my commitment. Versus, I think there are some where we see renegotiations of term sheets have happened. In some cases, cancellations altogether have happened as well. I think some of these have happened more in later rounds than in earlier rounds, but those have happened. Um, Again, in no way can one support that behavior. I think it is, in my books, it's actually not an acceptable behavior. That being said, I think you as founders have to be prudent and deal with the options you have on the table. My bias will be that if I were in your shoes, even if it means renegotiation, be open to that renegotiation because times are going to be tough. Finding other options are actually going to be harder. Getting a new investor interested in your company after the existing one has completely backed out, I think is going to be harder. So you are still better off holding on to your existing option, even if it means that you have to go through certain level of renegotiation. Um, yeah, that's I guess what the investor sentiment. Um, I would say at this point in, I think people will be cautious, even though they'll continue to make investments. I do expect that valuations will drop, and I think valuations, in my books, is directly correlated to amount of competition you have for your deal. And as that competition goes down, I think you will find that valuations will go down, round sizes will go down, and probably in the overall scheme of things, the dilution that founders take, I think, might actually go up in this situation. So be prepared for that. Be prepared for a lot of negotiation on these things. The last thing I was going to say is sort of coming back to the topic on what else can you do uh, to to think about the cash that you have in the bank and what some of our portfolio companies have done. And again, some of these are random examples, but I think first thing to keep in mind is that think cash flow and don't think P&L. And sorry, I don't want this comment to be published because it may be taken out of context. In many cases, and again, I'll take a SaaS example. Let's say you booked revenue for 12 months because somebody paid you advance cash for 12 months, which is very typical in SaaS. And let's say it's a $10,000 deal. Now in the P&L, it's going to be accrued in every quarter. So you will show a fourth of it in Jan to March, a fourth of it in April to June, etc., etc. So your P&L will still show that top line every quarter, but actually you will not have any incremental cash for that deal in these quarters. So as you are building out your revised operating plans, if I may say, um, build a P&L plan, but also build a cash plan. And I think that cash plan actually takes more materiality, in my opinion, at this point than even P&L. So, so be very prudent in projecting your cash flows. If you are making certain gross margin assumptions, maybe be a little bit more conservative. I think you will find that for everything a customer wants to buy, the customer has more options today. Whereas as a provider, you have probably lesser customers to go to. And therefore, pricing will take a hit, margins will take a hit, payment terms are going to take a hit. So be prepared for all of that to happen. Second thing is that as a founder, there might be actually quite a few levers that you can exercise. So at least, and again, I'm certainly stating the obvious, um, rethink the real estate contracts that you have in place. Many of you are paying rent. Um, uh, at least a lot of our companies have massively renegotiated the rent. And that comes in multiple forms. Part of renegotiation is I was taking 2 floors, I'm going to take one. Part of it is that, look, none of my employees are coming to office, so I need a waiver of the April rent. It can also be the fact that I will pay the rent, but I'm going to pay that 3 months later, so I need a moratorium on the rent. And also reduced rent. I think if you are a commercial real estate landlord today, you know that the writing is on the wall. So I think most of those, like you, with your customers, I think they're all open for renegotiation. So I would be fairly relentless in renegotiating my rental contracts, renegotiating the lease payments, see which ones you can defer. And I think you will find out that you can actually defer a lot more than you think you can. Think about deferring your loan repayments. Anyway, RBI is at least coming up with the advisory that there will be a 3-month moratorium. The interpretation of that is still sort of subject to change by different NBFCs. But I do think that you should go back and renegotiate. In many cases, I do know that unless you go back and renegotiate, your creditor is actually um, not going to automatically give you the moratorium. But I'm assuming that you're exercising all those options. And the third thing that at least we are doing across our portfolio is that to the extent you had raised a round and whatever amount of money you have, whether that money is 1 crore, 50 lakh, or 20 crores, I don't know, whatever it is, you usually put that money somewhere. At least we found that people had put some of this money into corporate debt funds. These are classical fixed income products, give you whatever 7, 8, 9% in many cases. And these were considered to be relatively safe investments. Or in many cases, people had put that into liquid funds, which actually also in the back end has exposure to corporate debt. At least what we are doing across our portfolio, we believe that corporate debt can also be risky at this point. Even good corporates could be defaulting on their loans in the next 6 months. And you don't want to be taking a capital risk on the capital that you already have. And therefore, you want to preserve the principal and not be as aggressive on the returns on that principal. And at least in our portfolio companies, we have moved all that money either to bank FDs or to overnight funds. So, because even though you may lose a couple of percentage points in terms of the return, but that's a better situation than actually losing any part of that principal by itself. So, at least that's the approach we have taken in these companies. Um, I actually am going to take a pause at this point in time. Happy to cover topics that people would like to cover beyond this.
So Alok, I have a question which I got over mail from one of the founder.
Yeah.
As the situation is uncertain, even the larger enterprises seems to have to not have fully evaluated the situation and do not want to open new sales talks. Based on your experience, what you have seen, what are your thoughts around it? How do the startup founders overcome these barriers now?
Fair point. So, let me actually put some numbers into perspective here. And whatever opinion I'm also giving on the future, please take it with a healthy dose of bias. I do belong to a slightly pessimistic camp at this point in time. But in 2008, and I don't know if I covered this in the last webcast, as I said, I was running the large enterprise accounts for SAP in India. 2008 calendar Q3, which is June to September. Um, you know, in general, in large enterprise software companies, at least, most of the deals actually happen in the last couple of weeks of the quarter. And so that was very typical thing. Uh, if I if I remember correctly, Lehman Brothers happened on the 16th of September in 2008. And suddenly our global pipeline dried up literally overnight. I think the Indian economy was actually in pretty good shape at that point. We were a bit lucky that I think we were on such a high that even post Lehman, I don't think the Indian corporates immediately stopped spending. And sometimes a couple of weeks makes a difference. So at least India didn't react in the next 2 weeks, which basically meant, at least for me, I can tell you that 2008 third quarter calendar Q3 was the best quarter I've had as a sales guy in my 10 years of sales. And 2008 actually turned out to be a very good year for me. But because of Q1 to Q3, in Q4, which is actually where our quota was the highest, I think, if I remember correctly, we were about 1/20th the size of Q3, which basically meant that if we made $20 in Q3, we made $1 in Q4. So we totally fell off the cliff. And to Sunil's question, I think in general, I feel what people care the most about is uncertainty. They can, in an uncertain environment, people are not able to make decisions. Once I know, so let's say that there is a large company which had a loss, and once the loss is incurred, they know what the situation is. They can make new decisions, whether that's spending lesser dollars or whatever it is, but they can make the decisions. At least the variables are clear to them. But in an uncertain environment, you actually cannot make decisions because you don't know what life is going to be 3 months from now, 6 months from now. And at least that's what we witnessed back in 2008 also. And companies totally stopped spending. And if I think about how much time did it take for a similar level of revenue to actually fully come back, I think it took us 2 years in that situation. And please bear in mind that I think of SAP practically as a monopoly. It's not as if as a large enterprise you can say, oh, I won't do with you guys, I'll actually go for someone else. By and large, bulk of this country runs on SAP. So as I said, it's a virtual monopoly. But despite that virtual monopoly, it took 2 years to reach a point of full recovery. So I expect that the same is going to happen at this point. In fact, if at all, I expect that the uncertainty at this point is going to be actually much, much larger. 2008 was a financial crisis. I think 2020 and 21, in my opinion, first begins with the humanitarian crisis. We don't know what the humanitarian cost of this entire disease is going to be. We don't know whether this is going to be a single wave or this is going to be multiple waves. So also it's a global crisis. There are cases already in 200 plus countries that we know of. I think the other reality is that our financial system is probably in a much worse shape than where we were in 2008. Bank NPAs are much higher. GDP growth is actually much slower. You put all of these together, I think we were already facing a credit squeeze in the economy even before this happened. And therefore, I would actually be a bit bearish on where the large enterprise spend is going to go. Of course, whatever is a must do, they will do. But whatever is not a must do, I think everything of that will get postponed at this point in time. We are already beginning to see that. One of our best companies, which sells to large enterprises, we saw a fairly healthy double-digit drop from their forecast for March end. And that is when they had most of their revenue in contracts already. But despite that, there was a very healthy double-digit drop on the forecasted revenue, literally in a week's time. And that is very much the case, I think, across the board. There is a question which is that we have seen good growth in it's a content platform in last 2 weeks. We see there's a great opportunity. Sorry, Sunil, should I read that question or you were going to ask me a question?
I mean, it's up to you. If you want, I can also read out.
No, I was just going to read out that question. And so I guess it's a content company. And the question is from Manjunath Rao, who is the CEO of Electreps. And it's a content platform. The question is that we have seen good growth in last 2 weeks. And we see there's a good opportunity to grow to new cities. Should we be feeling safe with better runway or grow to new cities? So, Manjunath, I think it's a tough question. And tough question for multiple reasons. Tough for me because I'm actually not a content guy. So, take my opinion only as a layman in this situation. I do think that from an engagement perspective, content companies are a net beneficiary of this crisis. We will see a lot more content consumption. Online content is going to go up significantly. However, so I think it depends on the stage of your company. If you're at that stage where you are trying to build a new audience and you're trying to build the engagement for that audience, I think it's a good time. I would actually see this as an opportunity. On the other hand, most content companies at some point need to figure out what their monetization is going to be. And to the extent a lot of that monetization is actually advertising, I think advertising dollars are going to go down at this time. So you might see that engagement is up, but monetization is actually lower. So you should still judge what it does to your cash flow. Second thing that I would also do, Manjunath, if I were in your shoes, is that again think about what's the amount of cash you have or what's the runway you have. Because in general, consumer companies which are which actually don't have a strong revenue model today. And very often content companies do find themselves in that situation in the early stages of their evolution. Then I think what should I say, the amenability from the venture ecosystem to fund actually burn companies without a very clear revenue model, I think you might find yourself to be in a tighter spot. But again, look, I'm giving you generic answers, and specifics can vary very dramatically. I am not as familiar of your specific company, so please take this opinion with a pinch of salt.
So I'll bypass the question from Pratik because you have already answered a large portion of his question. So one very interesting question I've come up with is, so do you see the US manufacturing shifting from China to India, because that opens up many business opportunities for the Indians if it is happening so?
I think the short answer is no. I don't. I think we underestimate what it takes to become a manufacturing powerhouse. And I think we are living in a fool's paradise, practically, when it comes to understanding how far behind China we are. I think there is actually not even a comparison. If somebody wanted to shift out of China today, I think they will go to Vietnam, they'll go to Malaysia. There are other countries they would go to. I'm actually not even sure if India is really in the queue on that front. Number two, actually China has opened up. In fact, I was speaking to a large B2B supply chain company yesterday. They are reorienting themselves to supplying PPE, which, as you can imagine, is the word du jour. Everybody wants PPE. The world wants PPE today. It is not India which is manufacturing. It is still China that is supplying to the entire world, despite the fact that they had 80,000 cases. China actually has opened up faster than we would like to believe. So, if at all, I think people are going to see China as more resilient as a result of this crisis, as opposed to the other way around. And as I said, I just think that as a country, when you think about certain spaces, it's not as if you can gain overnight expertise or experience in these spaces. It takes years to gain to go up the experience curve in certain spaces. So just because there's a crisis that hit 4 weeks back doesn't mean India is going to suddenly sort of ramp up the manufacturing curve that easily. So long term, we will have to take, I think, very systemic steps to be able to increase our manufacturing capabilities. I don't think Corona is going to do that.
Okay, so the other question is, one of the things that you mentioned in your previous talk was letting go of the team if required. So one of the founder, he has raised this. I am being told that could be a very risky, and the government may take action against it. Is that a real risk? Do you really see it as a real risk?
This question I'm going to defer, because I'm in a public forum right now, and actually I don't think it'll be appropriate for me to comment on this thing. I would say take your own call on this thing. Consult people, do the private consultations, and I think you will be able to figure out the right answer to this question. Best is that you go to other founders and understand what they're doing in this situation.
So in this scenario, which sector do you think will be spending largely on the SaaS and marketing? So you think edtech or gaming or online, are these going to be the largest spenders on the SaaS platforms?
See, gaming, etc., are not the largest segments for SaaS or software at large. Usually for most SaaS companies I've been in, they're actually very small segments. So I don't think that that's going to be, I'm still thinking through your question, Sunil. One of the board calls I had last week, clearly people are downscaling on travel, transportation, some of those things. So you don't expect an airlines to buy today. But on the other hand, I think if you look at consumer goods companies, especially the ones which are in the classical basic consumables, people are, of course, seeing e-commerce companies. So there will be many sectors where logistics also, there will be actually higher demand, or at least continued demand. But I think the broader point that you're making is that I would strongly advise companies not to suddenly stop making marketing expenditures. I think there is sometimes a tendency that let me just shrink my marketing budget to zero. please do remember that by shrinking marketing budget to zero, and again, this is just an example. Let's say your marketing budget was $5,000 a month. You make it zero. But what if you actually in the process end up foregoing $10,000 of revenue that could have come from that? So you are actually going a net minus 5,000 from your cash flow perspective by reduction of that spend. So um, I don't think we should make knee-jerk reactions on this front. Yes, you should question every dime you're spending, but go under the hood. Look at the 80-20 calls that you need to make. Look at what makes sense, and take those calls judiciously, I would say. And if that means that you divert more dollars to sectors which are more open to buying, less dollars to sectors which might be less amenable to buying, yes, I think that's what you would do. And in many of these things, I think today you have tools like A/B testing available. So let's say you are a company with an inbound marketing beat, right? I think today there are tools that actually allow you to experiment quickly and say that, look, I think I'm getting more bang per buck here, less bang per buck here, and therefore divert more dollars where it sort of makes sense. So be very decisive, be very quick about these things.
So recently, there has been a surge in the number of startups coming in the rental space for the two-wheelers or four-wheelers. Where do you see those moving from here now?
It's a good question. In full transparency, I think I should tell you that we are investors in a company called Vogo. So
actually, the question came specifically to Vogo. I don't want you to take the name.
Given that we are actually the first investor in Vogo, I think here is our view on that space. That look, during the lockdown, there is no demand, very little demand. So that you can't do much about. We do believe, however, that India is a country where a vast majority of this country ultimately needs to earn their bread on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. India is not a Singapore, though by the way, Singapore is not locked down, but we are not $100,000 per GDP per capita. We are $2,000 GDP per capita. 60% of our country is actually still involved with agriculture in one way or the other. And there, they are actually $600 to $700 GDP per capita, right? So an average person there makes $50 a month. Translate that to $12 or $15 a week, right? So people make just tiny amount of money to live for what they live for. And they cannot afford to have a lockdown for too long. People will need to get out, and I think people will need to do work. So point number one is that we do expect people to come back. Now the question is, as they come back, what are they going to use as transportation options? I think there you will find it's an affordability curve. Those that have their own cars, own scooters, own bicycles, I think will do, because that's the safest option. You are the only one touching the surfaces of those vehicles. I mean, to be honest, at this point, we have a driver. We'll continue to pay our driver, regardless of whether he's coming or not. But even if I have to go to office on 16th of April, I'm going to drive myself. I don't want anybody else to drive for me at this point, right? But I don't think, again, bulk of the country can afford that. So when you think about two axes, which is affordability of a solution, so highly affordable or not affordable, and also how the proximity equation, that is it in high proximity to other people or low proximity to other people, I think you will have to map the transportation options onto this grid. And at least we believe that Vogo kind of an option lies in a bucket where it has low proximity and actually high affordability. And people will still need last mile solution. So at least we do believe that there is actually going to be a strong market. So we expect that to be actually a net beneficiary as opposed to losing out because of the situation. But again, you will have to take a company by company view on these things. I think shared transportation options, on the other hand, I think are going to suffer a little bit.
Okay. So with this Corona COVID crisis, a lot of companies will try to get away from the human dependencies.
Yeah.
Do you see RPA's chatbots business going up after this?
It's a very good question, and actually, I want to be honest while answering. Is that I'm torn. I don't think I can give a straight yes or a straight no, because I think I just don't know enough. So we have one of our companies in a similar space, they actually found that their demand actually went up even in the last 2 weeks of March. They had a bunch of large deals in the pipeline, and I was a bit pessimistic. I thought they are not going to close during these weeks. But actually, in their case, out of all of our SaaS portfolio, they fared the best. If I were to take only the last 2 weeks of March as a barometer of answering your question, Sunil. So there may be some truth to it because cost rationalizations do become important for larger enterprises. And even if they were sitting on the fence, I think at this point they will do it. Number two is that in many cases where these employees were physically coming to office, they can't come today. So you have no choice but to do it actually through technology. So it becomes a compulsion. And I think it's anybody's guess as to how many lockdowns will be there, when they will happen. So when you don't know these answers, you are actually trying to prepare for things that actually can continue the can create business continuity. So to a certain extent, I think RP and bots actually do provide better continuity for these businesses and create lesser sort of human dependence. On the other hand, anything which is going to be a long cycle implementation and is of the nature that you will see first cash outflow for 6 months before you see the benefits, I think people will be shy off. So at least I think that things which are small, tuck in, very immediate impact, short cycle implementation, I think those will actually see a positive impact in demand. But anything which is sort of larger projects, I think will take a backseat at this point in time.
Okay, I think we should be taking the last question now,
Okay.
and it's a long question. So we are a consultancy into cloud payroll management and CFO services for startups to mid-sized companies. April is the time when most of the clients take the decision to outsource payroll management, but unfortunately, because of the COVID-19, it's difficult to follow the traditional sales method in reaching out to the corporates. Do you think it's the right time to go for more digital marketing to reach out to the customers and increase spending on marketing?
So I think my view is yes, one should. I think in many ways there are certain things that you need to do purely from a compliance perspective. That's just cost of living. Much like you need to breathe, you need to file your accounts after March. You need to execute your payroll. And actually, yes, I think in these situations, I think if I go back to my earlier comment, I think that in this crisis you will learn a few skills and you will take a few decisions that actually will stand you in very good stead way beyond this crisis. And therefore, for example, in this crisis, you might actually realize that digital marketing is actually a better channel than you thought it was. And I think this will be a very opportune moment to be able to invest in learning those skills. In April, I see very little possibility of feet on street sales for anything. I think that bulk of India will continue to be in a lockdown, and therefore digital marketing actually can be a very good channel. And you might find your customers to be a lot more amenable to it than what they would have been, because they would have expected you to come 4 times into your office, negotiated the hell out of you before sort of pulling the trigger. I think they might end up making those calls today on phone or on the web.
So I'll just take one more question, very interesting one. So it's a B2B engagement platform which is being sold to the schools. So many of the parents have been requesting us to give us the online or the downloaded version of the lectures, but we are not sure whether they'll pay us or not. What is your take on this? Should we try it out? How do we go about it?
Okay, so I think two-part answer to it. In building any business, step one is to make sure that you are able to figure out the product market fit. And step two is then to figure out the monetization to it. And as I say that, I do realize that monetization sometimes can be linked to product market fit, because if you're giving something free, how do you know that there's a product market fit? Because everybody likes to buy free stuff. That being said, I still think that there are lots of components in product market fit that you can figure out even without the monetization piece of it, right? I think in particular engagement in online education tools, for example, or the level of efficacy of the content that you're providing to the end user, I think you will learn a lot of things even without monetization. And if I were in your shoes, I'll actually see this as an opportunity. I will actually give it out to people. You do want to make sure that as you are not sort of pricing yourself low, you want to say that, look, We are doing this because of COVID situation. Continue to maintain engagement with that audience, and as you see engagement, I think actually you need to begin to push monetization also, because you're not a charity, you are a business. You ultimately do need to monetization what you do, but first build engagement and then actually go for monetization will be my advice to you.
Okay, one last question. Sorry,
Sure,
this is
sure.
actually
No, no,
going to be the
absolutely.
last one. Okay, so remote working is now being promoted. I mean, we are not left with any other option. Do you think it is going to stay, or it's just for the time being?
Um, okay, my view is that some habits will change, but not like massive. So this is not as if 6 months later it will be a changed world as far as comes to work from home. I don't think so. With all due respect, I think most of the tools that we are using today have existed for a long time, right? If you think about companies, they actually had enough reasons to use those tools, whether it's real estate cost, whether it's travel cost for physical meetings. It's not that they didn't have enough drivers to have thought they were only waiting for Corona to happen to try these out for the first time. But I think life or doing business is also a contact sport. There is something to be said about meeting people face to face and doing business that actually I don't think just doing it on video or phone actually replaces. So I think bulk of it will come back to physical. Whether that happens in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 18, I don't have a clue, right? But I do think that it is going to be very elastic. It's almost like, yes, we are stretching it in one direction. Bulk of it will come back. There will be some elastic component of the spring, so which will have some permanent impact. But I think it will be relatively small.
Okay, okay. Thank you. I think so. It applies to me also. I've been very reluctant of using video meetings and all, but this COVID has forced us, and I think I'm very much comfortable. And I think it net to net it increases the productivity of the overall day. If we are able to take on, maybe out of 4, if we are able to do 2 or 3 meetings on online, I think
Right.
it gives you a lot of space to breathe. Thank you so much, Alok. Thank you very much for coming back on and sharing your experience. I think everyone has. I personally enjoyed a lot, and look forward to further engage with you. Thank you very much.
No, not at all. First of all,
If you
I want to thank NASCOM and you personally, Sunil, for organizing this. And I again want to emphasize that look, priority number one is safety. Safety for you, safety for your families, and safety for your extended family. So please don't compromise on that, as important as your businesses are. I hope you stay safe. And I do recognize that for many of you, this will test the survival capability of your business. So there, actually, I would say be decisive. And if you do need to overreact, do overreact, will be my primary message. Sorry, Sunil, I cut you off and you were saying something
No,
also.
I just wanted your one last comment, and you have already made that. Thank you.
Take care. No, thank you so much. All right. Good luck to all of you.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.